Hi everyone, this is Nikki and today I'm here to share a card with you. This card is a simple card, but it has a huge impact. It's very easy to create, and so I wanted to take you through the process. I started with some beautiful colored cardstock and 2 Kat Scrappiness dies. I actually forget that later on I'm going to use a different die as well, but just these 2 simple dies. First is the Wreath Die. We're going to use the Noel that has a shadow to it, which is really nice. We're also going to use Build-A-Bow, but I didn't know that when I first started filming this video. So the wreath I'm going to cut out of this green. We're going to do a little extra with our products to make them look more elegant. We're going to add a little Distress Oxide to these. To give my wreath just a little extra, I'm going to cut 2 of these wreaths out, and the reason is because I want to stack them on top of each other and just make there be more dimension. So I'm going to use black soot. It's a Distress Oxide ink. Anything that helps you just add some gray or some dark to the edges of your dark cardstock really gives it a nice effect. It makes the middle of it so much lighter, and so it gives just this cool, almost like a spotlight effect in the middle. You can make this more exaggerated by doing something like a white ink over the top of the middle, but I just really love that I can use black soot and create some different effects on my colored cardstock. So I'm going to go around my navy cardstock and create a shadow on the edges. This cardstock is cut to a standard A2 size, so I'm not going to be mounting it on anything. I just want this to be my backdrop. It is, if you don't know what a standard A2 size is, that is 4.25 by 5.5 inches. I'm sorry, I do not know what that is in millimeters, but that is just your standard A2 size. And I'm going to add some black soot to the wreath as well, just lightly on the edges, and that just gives it some change in color. Normally I would say if I was doing a card and I was taking a longer time, I would ink blend these leaves so they have more variation, but if you put black soot along the edges, it really makes them stand out, and it's really a lot faster way to create that same kind of depth. I'm going to do it on both layers, and then I'm going to layer up my wreath where it's not exactly, so where you can see both sets of leaves basically, not exactly on top of each other. Next, I'm going to add some gold splatter. I'm using my Altenew watercolor set to add that gold splatter. There are lots of gold sprays. There's so many different options for this, so just whatever way you usually add your splatter. I'm adding a little hint of gold because I'm going to make my sentiment a glittery gold, and I'm doing it on both sets because, like I said, some of the leaves will peek through from the back, so you want to put the gold on both of your sets of wreaths. Now, if you ever feel like you're not getting the color exactly on the leaf that you want, you could always take the tip of your paintbrush and touch a couple of the leaves. I just noticed there was a couple of spots that I wasn't getting, and so I added just a little bit with my brush. Okay, and here's how that looks up close. So you've got some sparkle. It's subtle, but it's really nice on these wreaths, and it really complements the fact that we're about to use a gold sentiment. This is the set I forgot to include at the beginning of the video. It's called Build-A-Bow, and it makes 4 different sizes of bows. And so I'm going to use the smallest bow, and each bow has its own middle piece. It's got the loops, and it's got kind of the tails of the bow. This is a great thing to use your scrap pieces of paper for because they're very small and tiny, and you can make such cool colors. So I'm going to use pieces of this scrap, and I realized I could use even smaller pieces of the scrap and still have some left over. So I'm going to use some of this red, and then we're going to put the pieces together. I have several tips on assembling this bow, and so I'm going to kind of zoom in so you can see the parts. One thing that I used was, you could use a pencil. I used a bone folder from Kat Scrappiness, and I just kind of wrapped my bow around. It just makes it fluffier, and it helps you curl it without creasing the paper. So I do this. You could do it with a pencil, anything you have on hand, and go ahead and get your pieces curled because we're going to need to glue them to the back, and it's a teeny little area. So it's just nice to have that done. I do the same thing with the middle piece just to give it some bend instead of cracking the paper. So I don't know if anybody else has trouble with this, but sometimes with colored cardstock, I will crack it and it just makes it not as pretty of a look. So next we're going to use glue dots. These are the mini glue dots. You could use any type of adhesive that you want. I do think not using a glue is a little bit easier. If you have a glue that dries pretty quickly, you could hold this bow together, but these glue dots are basically just a piece of adhesive that sticks on, and then they're immediately going to keep everything in place versus waiting on a glue to dry. So you want to stick your middle piece down. You're going to have to use a lot of glue dots, I will say, because we're going to use a glue dot pretty much for every step. So we're going to do this side. I got this part a little bit bent, so I'm just kind of making sure that I keep my bow looking nice and pretty. And then we'll grab another glue dot. I've found the easiest way to get glue dots off is to use a little pointy tool. You still usually end up having to use your fingers a little bit, but it helps you apply the glue dot. And then I'm going to do my next little bundle here. Very nice. Our bow is coming together, and there's two sides to this bow, one that's a little bit larger than the other, and I feel like when you see, you'll want to make sure you've got the bow the way you want. This to me is the back. That looks like the front. I don't want to be able to see my other pieces of the loops behind it. So you'll need to know that when you're placing your middle piece, because your middle piece is going to come together on the back and you'll be able to see it. You want to have the prettiest part forward. And I'm going to apply a glue dot on the front of this, and then I'm going to add my little middle piece of my bow. So I've got the bow where I feel like it should be facing that's the card part that's going to face out. So I want to make sure I don't see any adhesive, and I want to make sure that this little piece is completely covering that front. You'll see that it'll meet in the back, and sometimes you're a little bit off, but you're going to see that it's got a junction there. So that's why there is actually a front and a back of this bow. Add another glue dot, and with this bow, I'm going to bend everything over it. There may still be a little sticky that shows just because that tab's not quite long enough, which is okay. It helps you stick it to the next part that you need, but just know that that's there. Now look how beautiful it looks from the front. I just think it looks like the perfect bow. All I need to do are attach these little tails, and so I'm going to do one more glue dot, even though I've got some sticky that's kind of showing through on the back of that bow. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and put a glue dot. And then this bow lifts up a little bit, so you're going to need to hold some pressure in the middle to make sure you pick up that back piece. Isn't that just gorgeous? To create the sentiment, I'm going to use the Noel die and the shadow, and I'm going to cut this shadow out of vellum, once again using some scraps because it's a small area, and then I'm going to do the letters out of the glitter cardstock. So when you're going to vellum, it's definitely easier to use a double-sided adhesive. So the back of these letters have some double-sided adhesive on them, and that just keeps you from squishing the glue out on your vellum, which will make a mark that you can see. So I'm just being careful with that and making sure I've got everything where I need it to go before I put it down. The nice thing about this word die is that you've got the individual letters. So if you didn't want to use the shadow, you could really arrange these in any way that you wanted to. I'm going to glue these two wreaths together, and like I said, I'm offsetting them a little bit just to give it a little bit more dimension. So I'm going to use a liquid glue to do this to give me a little freedom to move it around, and also because I just think it's a lot more work to put the double-sided adhesive on this if I didn't die cut it that way. Next, I'm going to show you some secret ways to add some other dimension to this, so not just these little red sequins. I'll show you in the next clip. Okay, here it is. This is a trick that I use often. So I'm using a C2, which is a cool gray color, and I'm adding some depth to this bow. Now, this looks real obvious when you first put it on, but it's gonna dry and just leave a shadow. So it just gives that bow a more real look by adding that little bit of depth to it. So just a little cheat you can do to add a little bit more to your projects. I could do this on the leaves too, but I mainly did it on the bow just to add a little bit more depth and dimension in the areas that I felt like would have a shadow. So to finish this wreath up, I'm adding these ruby red jewels. They're so fun, and they really just give this a little extra sparkle. You know, when I'm doing something for the holidays, I love adding as much sparkle as possible, and this is a way to give that wreath just a little bit more depth and dimension by adding these rhinestones. They are so cute. So Kat has tons of different embellishments that you could use. I just chose these because they were sparkly and they were red and they kind of look like berries on my wreath. So I just went around and added it to the whole wreath, and I think it really made it look spectacular. I hope you agree and that you learned something from this video today, even if it's just that you can put together a pretty simple card, add as many details as you want to, and get those Christmas cards and New Year's cards out. This wreath is so versatile. It'll be great for all times of the year, and my favorite new die is this Build-A-Bow. I just love how beautiful the bow turns out. So make sure if you haven't done it yet that you hit subscribe and like on the channel. That really helps me out, and everything that I've used in this video I will link in the description. And if you get a chance, go check out Kat Scrappiness's store. All right, so here's that final card. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I really had fun making this card. Get out there and make some cards. Check out all the things that you need to look for in the description if you're interested in any of these products. And I'm going to pop up a video here that I think you would love to see next.